labor economics. People don't want to show you this graph. The Koch brothers, all the major capitalists, bourgeoisie, they've paid a lot of money to keep you from seeing this, but it's very simple. What we've got here is a very basic, fundamental supply and demand curve. So what you see here is a graph, obviously. You've got your y-axis, which is wages. You've got your x-axis, which is number of workers. Very simple. This represents the American job market. This is your supply of workers. This is your demand for workers. And the way this works is very simple. When there are not a lot of workers, you have very high demand and therefore high wages. So, for example, you may think of a doctor. There's not a lot of highly specialized doctors. You think of an anesthesiologist, a heart surgeon, a neurosurgeon. This takes a lot of investment, a lot of talent, work ethic. I mean, people that are able to become doctors, you get all the stars to align to become such a skilled person. There's not a lot of them. So because there's not a lot of them, but it's obviously a valued profession, you're going to have a high wage. Not a lot of workers. It's a scarce labor market. You're going to have high demand. You're going to have high wages. At the other end, think of an Uber driver. Think of a fry cook. It doesn't take a lot of skill to be a fry cook. It doesn't take a lot of skill to be an Uber driver. What do you need? A license and a clean car? In some cases, not even that. Because there are so much of them, there's not a lot of demand. The supply is so high, so the wages are going to be low. Now, you see that in the middle here, where supply and demand meet, what you have is called the equilibrium wage. This is where we are. If we have X amount of workers, on average, you're going to get this wage. This is your equilibrium wage. Now, what you see is a very curious thing happen when you increase the amount of workers. Let's say we increase the amount of total workers that are in the system. And when I was pointing out the doctor or the Uber driver, those are all little data points along the demand line that constitute, this is how you get these trend lines of supply and demand. But the aggregate is what we're looking at when we look at equilibrium. What happens when we increase the amount of total workers? Let's say we have, for the sake of example, 100 workers in America, 100 units of workers. And this is where we are with equilibrium, wages, and number of workers. If we increase that number by, let's say, 100, now you have 200 workers in the country. What happens is that the equilibrium shifts down to the right. So now your new equilibrium number of workers is all the way over here, and you look at the new demand line, and, well, you look at that, drastically lower than where you were before. Wages have now declined. This is what happens every time you bring someone into the country. You have more workers, wages decline. Because, of course, if there's more people and more people need jobs, there's less demand for labor. If there's less demand for labor, people are willing to pay less. Or rather, people are able to pay less. Workers are willing to accept less wages. This is why, for example, you bring in cheap labor from Mexico. You bring in poor people, basically, and they'll work for $5 an hour. Sometimes it's totally illegal. But that's what happens. You bring in more people, and you get lower wages. Now, we saw that when you restrict legal immigration, the reverse happens. We saw that in 2018, as a result of President Trump's Buy American, Hire American policy, wages rose by 3%. This was in 2018. They were on track to rise 4% in 2019. They found that in 2018, wages rose higher in states with lower levels of legal immigration, such as Minnesota, where wages rose 5.2%. Employees who switched jobs gained a 4.6% increase in wages. So, of course, naturally, you restrict immigration, and, the economy grows, there's more jobs available. Relatively speaking, you will have less labor. Less labor means higher wages. You bring in immigrants, H-1B visas, illegal immigrants, it really doesn't matter. You bring in more people, you bring in more labor, you get a lower price, you get a lower wage. And you got to think about that in terms of American college students. You think of specialized labor, it's actually sort of interesting. You send your kids to college, and sometimes I've seen crazy numbers. I guess there's about 100 people in the country with more than $1 million in student loan debt. There's about 2 million people in the country with over $100,000 in student loan debt. So let's say you're an average student. The average student loan burden is $37,000. So you go to college, You work your butt off to get a good grade, get in a good school, get a good GPA, and you graduate. You come out of school with $37,000 in debt, only to find that, hey, I'm now competing with people from India. I'm now competing with people from China who shouldn't even be here. And as a result, I'm lucky to get a job. If I do get a job, I'm going to have a lower wage. Hey, good luck. Good luck to all those people who are graduating now with all these expensive degrees and everything, and they're competing with people who don't belong here. And what are your other options? If you're not even a college graduate, you're competing with illegal immigrants. Same principle. Lower wages because there's more labor. And so that's why this is just a horrible betrayal. And this is the real problem. By the way, you can look at the same formula basically with housing, but it's the opposite. As we have less, if we interpret this as the number of houses, for example, and this is the price of houses, if you have less housing available because there's more people, you get higher home prices. If you have more houses available because there's less people, you get lower home prices. It's all connected. It's all economics. You bring in more people, you have less resources, you have more labor, lower wages. None of this equates to a better standard of living, a better quality of life for the average American. What happens is that the things that we pay for get more expensive, and the money that we take home gets lowered. We get less wages. And so all of that combines to basically a wealth transfer. If you think that maybe you're getting away with it because, they cut your taxes, or, immigration being brought in is lowering prices or something. You pay a little bit less at Walmart because of free trade or whatever. Well, obviously that is totally compensated for by the fact that they're taking the money right out of your paycheck and through rising costs with other things which are scarce. And of course, the reason that this is happening is because this benefits big business. What is the number one, in most cases, the number one expense for business? It's labor. So if you're a business person, if you're an oligarch, okay, and you've got a major corporation, you've got billions, sometimes trillions of dollars to go around over multi-year periods of time, and you look at the situation, you say, wow, what stands between us and making tons and tons of money, what changes our bottom line is the fact that we're paying so much for American labor. Well, what if we just lobbied the Congress to bring in another million people, and now we pay less in labor costs? Oh, that's a done deal, says the board. So they set up the American Enterprise Institute, and they pay the top public intellectuals to say, hey, look at what great benefits immigration brings. They'll pay Jeffrey Tucker to say, Taco Bell is my church. We love immigration. We need more Mexicans. We need more Chinese people here. And we sell this to the rubes in the South and in the Midwest and everywhere else. Oh, it's taco stands, it's everything else. And what happens? They vote for Republicans who pass legislation that is their own economic disenfranchisement, their own economic displacement. This is what's happening. It is really this simple. It's two lines, supply and demand. It doesn't get harder than that. And you can have all the econometricians in the world, all these people with their complex mathematical formulas. Well, actually, you can bring in 5 billion people in 3 years, and you'll have a better standard of living. It doesn't add up. Doesn't add up. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the theory, it doesn't add up. And that's what's happening in the country. That's why it's happening. So that also is a teachable moment, by the way, for economics. All these free market shills out there, all these, I effing love capitalism faggots on Facebook. Who do you think is bringing all the people in here? It's not the Democrats. George W. Bush brought in 8 million people in his first 5 years. 8 million immigrants in his first 5 years, a record. It was George Bush who passed the 1990 Immigration Act, which is what caused this explosion of immigration in the last 30 years. If you think it's Democrats that are causing this, you're wrong. If you think it's only illegal immigration that's the problem, you're wrong. The problem is legal immigration, and the root cause of the problem of legal immigration is wealthy corporations, wealthy people that have bought and paid for the Congress. You cannot have a government that is executing the will of the people. You cannot have a regime, an executive, a head of state, which is acting in the interest of the nation at the same time that you have a man with $150 billion. It just doesn't work like that. You can't have it both ways. And so I'm not saying I'm a socialist, all right? I'm not saying I'm for drastic wealth transfers or anything like that, because I'm not. But I am saying that this infatuation, this love affair that we see between people like Charlie Kirk and the free market has to stop. Has to stop. If we recognize that the number one problem in the country is demographic transformation as a result of immigration, and who's pushing for it? It's the capitalist class. We got to do something about that first. You can win all the elections you want. You know, your YouTube video could get 1 million views, and your petition to build the wall can pass 5 million signatures. You can collect $1 billion to build a private wall. You know, it doesn't matter. So long as you have these wealthy interests, which are paying the politicians to bring in cheap labor, you know, nothing will ever change. That has to change first. So we have to favor people that are disruptive in that sense. So Tucker Carlson, you know, is a very important figure in that sense. When we look at his rhetoric, the kind of talk about market fundamentalism, in some ways is even more important than about the core issues, which are, in some ways, you could say, a symptom of the larger problem. So, look, it's basic labor economics. And if this comes to pass, you know, if Jared Kushner works out a deal and in 2020 Trump is running on like H-1B visas, the Trump revolution is over. It's dead, you know, totally gone. What Trump was about in 2016 was America first. America first in foreign policy, America first in labor, in economics, in trade, and everywhere else. And it seems like slowly but surely you've got all these subversive actors and subversive aides and all kinds of other people that are in the White House working every day to advance a liberal agenda. I mean, the stuff you see from Jared Kushner, expanding legal immigration, cutting deals on catch and release, criminal justice reform, you know, this is all stuff that would have forget Jeb Bush, this would have flew under Barack Obama. And I don't know, it's got to stop. It's unacceptable. You know, I'll say that I'll vote for Donald Trump in 2020 because you know that the Democrats will always be worse. You know, it's hard to believe, but they will be, right? I mean, they're pushing for tenfold whatever the worst Republican pushes for, but it's wrong. It's unacceptable. It's a betrayal of everything that he ran on in 2016, everything that he stood for. He's got to put his foot down because at a certain point, you know, you get a little tired of the cheerleading here. I'll always respect what he did for the country. I think he's a funny and a good man. But look, we can only take so many tweets about the press is the enemy of the people and the 13 angry Democrats. Yeah, that's great. When are you going to stop the invasion of the country? You're the president.